everybody. Welcome to another webinar here at Route Consultant. My name is Josh Gregory. I am the director of our consulting and training teams here. And so if you've never been here, never been to one of these webinars before, these are both for new investors looking to get into the space, learn about FedEx and logistics space as a whole. But it's also for contractors who've been in it for a long time. We want to make sure that this continues to be a space where you can come, learn about the new things affecting the industry, and get all of your questions answered. So it is a really important note that this is for everyone, anyone who's interested or has been a contractor for a decade or more. Now, before I get too far into it, I do have to read the disclaimer as I do every week. So Route Consultant is not endorsed by and is not recommended by Federal Express Corporation, FedEx Ground, or Amazon. Route Consultant is not sponsored by, is not approved by, is not associated with, and has no connection whatsoever with Federal Express Corporation, FedEx Ground, or Amazon. Now, all that to say is just that you will not be hearing anything that is materially non-public secret information here, but we do want to make sure you are learning everything you can about the space so that you can be successful as you get in and continue to be successful once you take over one of these businesses. Now, there will be a pure open Q&A at the end of today where we're going to go through any questions you have. And so when we get to it at the end of the session, make sure you're putting your question in the Q&A button at the bottom. If you put it in the chat, I'll miss it. So make sure you type your question into the Q&A at the bottom, and then we'll answer your questions live and make sure we get through as many as we possibly can at the end there. But before that, we do have some content that we wanted to talk through, some updates. So to help talk through the topic today, I've brought Danny Robinson on from our broker side. So Danny, if you want to come on, just give a 2-second intro and then we can jump into it.
Hey everyone, my name, like Josh said, is Danny Robinson. I am a regional sales director here at Route Consultant. Really excited to be back in the Wednesday weekly webinar with you. Some awesome alliteration there. We should use that. Anyway. So we're going to talk a little bit about blackout periods today. A formal one on the line haul side, a little more informal one on the P&D side. We're going to touch on both of those and what that's going to mean to you as a new investor or as a contractor, and more importantly, what you can do to keep the ball rolling on any acquisition or sale that you're working on right now. So I think that given the blackout period for line haul is looming and almost upon us, I'm going to go ahead and start there. So we'll go ahead and dive into what we in the industry call the TSPA blackout. And just a little bit of quick background there. A TSPA is what we, again, in the industry refer to as a line haul contractor. There's a TSP, transportation service provider for line haul, and an ISP, who is the contractor on the P&D side. So when we talk about the TSPA blackout, it is specific only to the line haul space. So the blackout period, and we'll dive into exactly what that is here in a second, but just for those of you who are actively looking at listings or working on closing a deal, that blackout period does begin this Friday. Technically it's Sunday, but we're going to say Friday because not much is going to happen on the weekends. And it will run through 2 full weeks where FedEx Ground stops all transactions on the line haul side. No contracts can transition from one person to another for that period, no exceptions. All of that is being done in an effort to renegotiate the rates, the mileage rates that these contractors are paid for the work that they do in the year preceding. I'm sorry, the year following that. So all of those rates will stand up and be in effect as of September 1st of this year. So with that in mind, I just wanted to kind of lay out the landscape there for you. That's the whole purpose of this blackout. Is unlike the P&D side, line haul contracts are negotiated all at once for that 2-week period. So every single line haul contract is done right then and there. And that's probably, just an assumption on my part, because about 20% of the ground network is made up of line haul contractors. So it's possible for the engineers in Pittsburgh to get all those contracts done at once versus the remaining 80% of the contractors that are ISPs or contractors on the P&D side. And those contracts are, as we know from previous content, negotiated on an annual basis, 12 months from when your previous contract stood up. So they're sporadically done throughout the year. Okay. With that being said, the run rates that you would get as a line haul contractor are very similar to what you're going to see on the Schedule C for a P&D ISP provider. So if you're familiar with that, that's what you can compare that to on the line haul side. I think it's really important to note that there has been an increase in rates every single year for line haul contractors for at least the last 7 to 10. And that's as far back as our records go here at Route Consultant. So it's basically a guaranteed pay raise that's going to hit you on your settlement statements every year on September 1st. And that's one of the more beautiful things about line haul is some of the back and forth on negotiations is really taken out of the mix. There's not a whole lot of unique characteristics and things like that that you're going to present on the line haul side. It's pretty cut and forward, and you're going to get a certain cent per mile raise or increase for every single one of the runs that you're doing. And then you can, then put that to use in your business how you see fit. With that in mind, I kind of wanted to talk about why that puts us in a position to be in a mindset of right now being the right time to look at pursuing these line haul opportunities. Just because there's a 2-week-long blackout period, it really shouldn't make you feel nervous about getting whatever deal you're working on or potentially starting up. You shouldn't be thinking about pushing that out until next year after peak season. And historically, I think that it's really important to mention in 2021 and 2022, both of those years, exactly 40% of the line haul deals that we closed as a brokerage for the entire year happened between the closing of that blackout period or September 1st and the end of the calendar year. There is a huge amount of work that we can do between now and then to make sure that you stand up on that contract. And it's going to be hugely beneficial for you to do that because obviously, like I said, we're looking at rate increases to hit September 1st. And of course, that's right on the precipice of peak season. And while P&D operators see the majority of the revenue booms from peak season, line haul definitely stands to gain here as well. There's going to be folks who have 5-day-a-week runs that are going to be pushed to 6 days a week, 6-day-a-week runs that are pushed to 7. There's going to be ample spot work that can be picked up as contingency opportunities for these line haul contractors. It's a really great opportunity for you to walk into the operation day one with a pay raise based off of how we evaluated the business previously, and with the thought in mind that there's a huge revenue boom coming from peak season as there is every single year. So with that being said, just kind of a quick summary of what that TSPA blackout period really is, how it's going to affect the acquisitions that you're working on, and then why it shouldn't affect at all the momentum that you've started to build in those deals, right? Keep working at them. We've got plenty of time to get it done in calendar year 2023. And we've got the exact right team in place here at Route Consultant to help you do that. So fear not, we're ready to move forward with you guys right now. Okay. What I'd like to do now is kind of shift a little bit out of the line haul space and talk about the peak season blackout for P&D. So in the P&D world, peak season runs from roughly the beginning of November through the end of the year, right? There's a critical 3 to 4 week long period right in the middle of that. That's going to run basically from Black Friday through the week of Christmas. That's where the majority of the insanity that is peak season is going to hit you. But technically peak season lasts a couple weeks from before then to a couple of weeks after. Typically we see some of that extra volume trail off about midway through January, and we're fully out of peak season at that point. So that being said, during peak season, ISPs, not TSPs because we're talking P&D now, ISPs can earn up to 30% of their annual revenue during that time period. It is an exceptional amount of package volume that's going to hit the belts and be loaded into your trucks, and there is absolutely no hiding from it. So now's the time to be preparing for that. Don't let it make you, don't fear. There's plenty of time to still get things put in place for that. And we've got all of the tools here again to help you. If that's what you need, just reach out to us and we'll be glad to help you through all of that. But with that being said, I think that it's really important to set out that P&D does have an informal blackout period. It's not just no holds barred, there's no deals happening, but it is a lot more difficult for businesses to transition during that blackout period, especially in that 3 to 4 week time frame from Black Friday to the week of Christmas. Like I mentioned, it's almost never going to happen there. That doesn't mean that we can't be structuring deals during that time, working on banking applications during that time. We can still be very proactive in preparing for Q1 closings during peak season. In fact, that's when a huge amount of back office work for Q1 is going to happen on both our side as a brokerage and consulting team and your side as buyer and sellers. So now is not a time to be complacent. It's a time to keep the ball rolling and keep preparing for Q1. So another note that I would like to bring into that side of things is almost unilaterally, the decisions for a P&D business transitioning during that informal blackout period is going to be made by the terminal manager. It's terminal specific. And a lot of times it's going to really center itself around how long that deal's been structured, if there was a confirmed stand-up date, maybe a week or two before that blackout period, and perhaps there was banking delays or something that has pushed that back. Typically, that's when we're going to see businesses transition during that time period, or in extenuating circumstances where there's someone who's on their way out or a failing operator that needs to have their business bought out or taken over by someone else. There's always going to be those extenuating circumstances, but please keep in mind that that's really going to be the exception, not the rule. So for new investors, even thinking about this, it may be wise to want to think about if you've got a business ready to close, but not a confirmed stand-up date. It may be wise for you to wait until post peak season. I don't think it's a bad thing to say. There's a lot of things that happen during peak, and it may not be the best time for someone who has no logistics experience to come in and try and take over a business. So work with your team at RC. Don't be afraid of any of that stuff. We can help you make those decisions, lay out action plans for you, and make sure that you feel as confident as possible in the decision that you're making for your acquisition. So with that all being said, the last point that I really want to bring up on this specific topic before we go into a couple of other things is looking at evaluations for deals that will close in Q1. And we've talked a lot about this in the past, about how Route Consultant goes through our methodology in evaluating businesses throughout the year and what timeframes and lengths of data we're going to use to break out these business valuations. So if you're going to be closing on a deal in Q1 of 2024, and that's what you're working towards, I would like you to keep in mind that we're going to be looking back at September and October 2023 data. We are not going to use that November and December timeframe because, like I said, that is when peak season's happening. And if you're going to do 30% of your business revenue and not 30% of the calendar year, it's obviously going to make things look a little bit juicier than they are. So we're always going to default to our standard practice, which is to find 6 to 12 weeks worth of data with no major holidays and no peak season included in that. Businesses that are evaluated during peak season always look a little bit better than than the regular time of the year, and that's why we avoid using that data. Also, when it comes down to the latter half of Q2, keep in mind if we're looking at any data from January or February, these businesses might still be a little bit heavy on the payroll side. They might have some extended expenses on the fleet side of their P&L as well, because they'll have been staffed up for peak season, which means more drivers on to handle more package volume. They may have needed to augment their fleet or their Schedule B, so there could be rental vehicles or short-term lease vehicles that are on there. And all of that's going to affect the margins of the business in a way that's not going to be standardized. And that's why we, again, ultimately are going to default to that September and October data to show the most true and conservative aspect of that business valuation. So just to kind of summarize everything that we've talked about here, we're right on the cusp of that 2-week-long TSPA blackout period, with those new rates standing up on September the 1st. We're a couple of months out still from the P&D side of things, so we've got plenty of time to get deals across the finish line. If you're actively working on something with us here at Route Consultant, don't pump the brakes. Now's the time to hit the accelerator, really get yourself across the finish line so you have enough time to not only get that deal closed, but again, make sure that you're staffed up and have everything operationally set aside and are good to go for that peak season volume surplus. Okay. With that, I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to turn it back over to Josh. I think we've got some events and some listings that we're going to talk about, but fear not, I'm not going anywhere. I'll stick around for the Q&A. So please make sure you enter all your questions into that Q&A button at the bottom, not the chat one, and I'll be right back with you guys. Okay.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah. And as I'm going through the inventory and the events, you can go ahead and start typing in your questions. But yeah, Danny covered everything perfectly. I always like to say, as an example, we talk about how it gets harder in the end of the year for P&D during peak season to close on a business. My record when I was a broker, the latest I did one was December 25th. We actually closed on Christmas morning. So it is possible. Like Danny said, though, the farther we get in the year, the harder it is. But there's, the doors don't close for P&D, but they do get harder to squeeze through. So just work with us, and these next few months are critical to make sure if you want to close before peak season this year. All right. So we have a few new listings this week to go over. So first few are on the P&D side. So first one is out of Arizona. It is 11 routes at 1.275 million, 21% margin, really profitable, low mileage business with a manager, 17 trucks and 6 spares. And it's an owner that's been running it for over 8 years as well. So It's one that also probably has some SBA financing that you can take on. The next one is out of northeastern New Mexico. It's 8 P&D routes at $475,000. It's got 2 managers, 10 trucks, and 2 spares, so a lot of help there on the operation side. And it's also mostly newer vehicles as well. And this is one that doesn't operate on Sundays. So if that's what you're looking for, this one out of New Mexico is a smaller price point that might be the right one for you. Last one on the P&D side is out of Southern California. This is 16 P&D routes at 1.66 million, 18% margin, really large operation that's very profitable, has a manager and an assistant, 20 trucks, 4 spares, and it's expecting to start in express in the near future. So this is one that if you can take advantage of it and get into it now, you'll see the volume come in and you won't have to pay for it later. So this is one that you can go ahead and that's one to be thinking about in general around express. Is if you can buy a business before express hits, then it means you aren't going to have to pay for the way that business will look after express. Our last new listing this week is a Linehaul listing out of Colorado. It is 3 Linehaul runs at $899,000. And it's got a 14% margin, really profitable with a new fleet, 4 2023 trucks, which that alone, if you know, is really high value. And it has a spare as well. These are all high mileage runs, and there's some assumable truck debt as well. So those are our 4 new listings for the week. If you have questions about any of them, reach out to our team. We can give you all the details. And then just quickly before we get to the Q&A, we have some events that I just wanted to make sure to highlight. So if you have never been to one of our new investor summits, those are basically a 2-day block of time where we're trying to teach you as much as we possibly can to help you make the decision whether or not FedEx is the right industry for you. And if you're going to enter the FedEx space and you're still on the fence, I really want you to enter it confidently and with an understanding of the industry. And that's what this summit is designed to do. So we've got one next week down in Nashville on August 14th and 15th. So that one's coming up pretty fast. And then we've got another one at the end of the month that is a Linehaul specific summit on August 28th. The one next week will cover P&D and Linehaul, but the one at the end of the month is only Linehaul. So you can look at it that way and decide which one you want to attend, but they'll both be in Nashville. The last event, just to mention quickly, is if you are in the Denver area, we will actually be up in your neck of the woods on August 17th. We have a happy hour there. So for anyone who's in the area, you can go ahead and register. It's free, and you can come out, meet everyone who is a contractor who's interested in the area, and we'll all be there as well. So it's a good time for us all to meet in person and connect, network. So that's in Denver on August 17th. And there's links to all of this in the chat. So if you're looking for details or how to register, they're all there. And then the last one, we just finished Expo just a couple of weeks ago out in Vegas, but you can actually go ahead and already register and book your hotel room for next year. And if you hadn't heard, the last couple of years we were in Vegas. Next year we are in Dallas, and it's at a really beautiful property. So I can't wait to see all of you there. Hopefully, if you didn't make it this year, you can make it next year. So we've already announced the dates. You can already register, and can't wait to see you there. We're already going to start that countdown to next Expo 2024. So that is it for the events and the new listings for the week. So we're going to go ahead and jump over to the Q&A. So first one here is, question is, what happens with a payroll compliance audit? How can we prepare for them? Are they random? So I'll take this one. So in theory, yes, they are random. What I would say is FedEx doesn't necessarily, it's not at a set time every year. Everyone doesn't get it. But there's also no criteria given by FedEx as to why they chose you. And what we're seeing is a lot of people, especially right now, are in that first year or at the end of a first year as a contractor, you're getting one of those payroll audits. And really the purpose of these is they're trying to make sure that you're paying your drivers correctly. And really what they care about is that you're paying overtime correctly. There has been, lots of different things that have happened in the FedEx space where they've seen some contractors that didn't pay correctly in a way where they essentially weren't paying overtime. Now, the thing to know is that if you're driving in over 10,000 pound vehicles, you do not have to pay overtime. But if you're in under 10,000 pound vehicles, you do. So where that comes in on this audit is they're going to look at what types of vehicles you have. How are you paying your people? Are you paying them daily rates or hourly? And are you tracking those hours in a way that they can agree with? And then from there, if the questions continue, they're going to want to see if you're paying, a daily rate or hourly, did you calculate overtime correctly and pay them correctly if they were in an under 10,000 pound vehicle? So that's really a lot of the main focus of that payroll audit. And then the other side of it is that they want to make sure that if all of your drivers that you had throughout the year, you paid through a W-2, that you paid correctly. And so what may sometimes happen in those payroll audits is they may come to you with a list of names of people that they're not seeing on your payroll, they're not seeing on your W-2s, but they did see on the scanners. So that's just something to be aware of, is the payroll audit is looking to try to make sure you are paying your people correctly and that you paid everyone who worked for you and that you didn't, send a Venmo or a Cash App. So those are the things that they're trying to look for. If you have questions on that, if you're going through one or about to go through one, reach out to our team and we can help there.
If I can add just one quick thing to that, you mentioned the over 10,000, under 10,000 pound vehicles. I did have a contractor that came to me in the recent past. And one thing I would recommend if you guys are currently in the space and you have a fleet that's mixed of some vehicles that are over 10,000 and some that are under 10,000, try to keep the same couple of guys on those over 10,000 pound vehicles, because what will happen is if you mitigate them or mix them up into the smaller trucks, it becomes a recording and reporting nightmare for you to try to decipher how many hours they were in the vehicle that was over 10,000 versus the under one. And it becomes very difficult to make sure you're accurately paying those overtime hours. So just a little inside baseball information there. I would really recommend you guys try and keep those drivers consistent in the weight class vehicle there.
Yeah, and the real letter of the law is if they drive for even one day in a week in an under 10,000 pound vehicle, then they do have to be paid overtime. So that is a really important note, and that's why it's if it's best you could just keep the same 2 or 3 people in those vehicles. The other note is if you have a salaried employee like a manager that's above a certain amount in pay, they often are not subject to those overtime laws. So without going too far into it, there's some state nuances as well. So as you're getting into a payroll audit or as you're worried about properly setting up your payroll, it is always worth your time and your money to talk to a wage and hour attorney for your state to make sure that any state nuance is also accounted for in how you're structuring your payroll. All right, next one here is from Jason. So he's a prospective investor and the contract with FedEx expires soon. Are there any guarantees that FedEx will extend his contract for 2 extra years? So Danny, do you want to say anything about that? And I can jump in too.
Yeah, absolutely. So it really depends on how you're acquiring the business. If it's being brokered, if you're getting that as an awarded territory through My Build a Ground Biz, there's some nuance there. But typically, if you're that close to a contract expiring before that stand-up date, generally you'll work with engineering to negotiate and go through. You'll be presented with 3 MISOs that you can go through like everyone else. I'm assuming this is P&D. So I would say, just double check, be in touch with your BDS officer as well as the terminal manager. They can loop you in with engineering. They're going to be the ones who would do the main amount of work on that piece. But I would expect that you will be presented with 3 MISOs and an opportunity to negotiate a contract out for 12 months beyond the one that you're acquiring when that one expires.
Yeah. And then just in general, you do own the exclusive rights to the territory when you're a contractor. So assuming that you've hit FedEx's standards, their KPIs, and the metal system that's a new part of how FedEx judges you, assuming you're not in the lowest tier of safety or the metal program, you'll still retain those exclusive rights. And it's kind of an assumption that you will be negotiating every year with that same contract. So what you do own is the exclusive rights to the territory. And unless you have done something to lose those rights, you are the person that FedEx is negotiating with for that territory.
First right of refusal. Gotta love it.
Yeah. All right. Next one here from Tim. So it's not officially confirmed, but he's trying to stand up on a P&D contract, an ISP contract in late August. Is there any impact with that given the Linehaul blackout? No. So the Linehaul blackout is a specific set of time, but it does not apply to P&D. It's on the FedEx administrative side, like Danny talked about. It's about adjusting the rates. It's not about volume. It's not anything that would affect you as a P&D contractor. So that doesn't matter, but everything that we talked about before, just the closer you get to peak season, the harder it is to close. So August is fine. August is great. If you can stand up in August, it's tons of time to prepare for peak season and make sure you're ready to go.
Yeah, during blackout period, it's just a blackout for businesses transitioning. Those line haul operators are still on the road. They're still running their trucks. They're still moving volume. It's solely around transitioning or reassigning those contracts to someone else. So it's business as usual inside of the terminal. It's just the engineering department off in Pittsburgh is working away like crazy on their keyboards, getting that work done.
I will say this is actually a really important note for those of you who are current line haul contractors for that blackout period. So, this doesn't apply to you. If you're a new investor, this won't matter for you. But if you are a current contractor, as of the end of this contract, so when the new contract starts in September, there will be a requirement that 90% of your current fleet hits that FCAM standard, so the FCAM technology. And so if you're not there yet and you're planning on adjusting your fleet on Schedule B, so either adding trucks that are FCAM compliant or removing trucks from that fleet list so that you'll hit that 90% threshold, you have to do it before the blackout period hits. Because once the blackout period hits, then they won't let you make any changes to Schedule B either. And so after that, you'll be up on a new contract and you won't be compliant. So just make sure if you do intend to make FCAM changes, and FCAM, for those of you who haven't heard it, forward collision avoidance and mitigation. Yeah, but basically it's an automatic detection and automatic braking system on the vehicle. And it is something FedEx is pushing for on the line haul side, but we're right up against that. So make sure you're making those Schedule B changes before the blackout period, if possible. All right, next one here is from Danielle. Are the routes that are listed on your website current and up to date? Yes, yeah. we update those weekly. Yeah, so that's what, when I was reading the new inventory earlier, those are all the listings that just came out today. And so we're making those updates and changes. And anytime a listing comes off the website or comes up, is no longer available because there's a contract, we take it off the website or mark it accordingly. So yes, they are up to date. And any information you want on them, we can give you everything we've got, settlement statements, whatever you need that on that specific business. This one's a funny one. Just where did all the volume come from? It must be a current contractor seeing a lot of volume in the network. We are seeing an uptick in several areas, and there's a few different factors that go into it. Part of it is UPS. Although the strike didn't happen, there were sellers that switched off of UPS as we started to lead up to that strike deadline. And just in general, seeing the risk factor of a company that can be held hostage by a union. As a supplier, as a large organization, you never want that risk. And so that did cause people to switch off of UPS, come into FedEx. And then yellow trucking, it'd be more on the line haul side, but is also a large logistics transporter that recently failed. And so there is volume there. And then the other part of it is just we're heading to the end of the year. We're kind of on the on-ramp for the rest of the year as volume continues to increase. So the normal volume increase is what's happening now. Some of you too, if you live in any kind of college town and you've got people who are coming back in town and ready to go to university, a lot of them are doing, shipping all of their stuff now instead of driving. So there's probably a bunch of deliveries there, but this time headed into the end of the year is the on-ramp. And then you've got a bunch of external factors like UPS and yellow that are adding onto that volume as well. So we are on the ramp towards peak right now. All right. So question from Jim. Is it standard practice in the industry to ask for 3 years of audited financials when valuing a business? If not, what is the length of history that is standard? So how would you answer that one, Danny?
Yeah, so it really depends on who's doing the valuation there. We're always going to use, like I said just a minute ago, the last 8 to 12 weeks of data, provided that's not during peak season for valuing these businesses. But there's, an added layer to that. If we valued the business, projected its value moving forward into the next 12 months, that's typically the front end of things so we can get deals structured. If you're moving into finance one of these deals, specifically through the SBA, then that's when the business valuation is going to be done by a third-party professional valuation company. And it is very standard for them to ask for 2 to 3 years of historical financials. So depending, Jim, on what the instance surrounding your question is there, it could be very standard. If you're just looking to get your business listed and market it to the number of investors that are looking to get into the space, then you won't need a full 3 years for that. But I will tell you, Jim, if you have an opportunity to gather that stuff ahead of time, it's going to make your life so much more simple. The more data you can give on the front end of a business valuation, the easier and more smoothly it's going to go towards the back end when things really start to get tight. So I wouldn't be hesitant if I were you to provide that information, but it certainly isn't required for someone like Route Consultant to come in and value your business to get it ready for market.
Yeah, Dan is exactly right. There's value in seeing the historicals of a business, but these businesses change so much week to week, much less year to year, that it's not a key part of our valuation. It is a part of where we're kind of referencing and comparing. And at the same time, if you're going through the SBA, there's things like that you kind of have to have. So we do try to get as much of that as we possibly can from the seller. But at the same time, also, seller might not have been operating for 3 years. So you can't always get 3 years, but we do try to get as much of that as we possibly can as a part of it. But if you can think about it, we're in 2023. 3 years ago is 2020. That year is going to look so different than right now. And if there's things like that, especially in this type of industry where historicals can be wildly misleading, both to the good and to the bad. So it's always about taking it with a grain of salt. Just a quick question. What's the actual official end date for the blackout, like the actual date? So it's August 25th is the actual end date for the blackout period. And then the rates will come into effect in September. Now, okay, so question here, and I'll just answer this briefly. He said all of his vehicles are over 10,000 pounds and pays a daily rate. So with a payroll audit, does he not have to show overtime? Probably not. The reason I can't give it a definitive answer there is because it can depend on the state. There are some states with state laws that contradict federal laws there when it comes to overtime. So that's why there could be a little bit of nuance there. It's really like DC, California, New York. There's a couple of them that have a little bit of difference. But the questionnaire you'll get from the audit is basically, do you have any under 10,000 pound vehicles in the fleet? Do you pay overtime? Do you have any bonuses? Like there are the questionnaire is only, 6 questions. And then there's some documents that they'll request. Really, you're trying to give the minimum amount of information in the questionnaire so that the audit will end. You want to give them the minimum sufficient information to answer the questions and move on. But there's a very high chance that if all of your vehicles are over 10,000 pounds, that you will not need to show overtime. You will still need to show that you're tracking hours, though, regardless of if you're paying hourly or if you're paying overtime. It is still something they will want to see as a part of the audit. Now, okay, the next one is, we'll see if you want to answer this one, Danny. How many years do the trucks for P&D last before they need a replacement?
Yeah, it's a fun question, and I won't answer it in a number of years. I will say that typically, we'll start to moonlight some of these things when they start hitting, 350,000 plus miles. But you got to think that most of these P&D trucks are an aluminum box on wheels, right? So a brand new truck's running you about $75,000 right now if you're getting into the P1000s and P1200s. But replacing an engine and transmission on one of those trucks is about $25,000. So if it's a drivetrain issue that needs to be fixed, it's much less of an issue for these guys to go in and go ahead and get the whole drivetrain swapped out, keep that same truck on the road, than it is to go invest $75,000 into a new aluminum box. So fleet strategy is something that we touch on a lot, and I'm sure we'll have another webinar on that very soon. But I will tell you that on the P&D side, as long as you are compliant with all of the FCAM and tech features that FedEx wants you to, drive until the wheels fall off, man. Just keep repairing them. And then when you want to replace them, go ahead and do that too. I recommend people have, their fleet broken out into several different chunks, and then you're replacing, 20% or so of your fleet every 3 to 5 years. And that should keep you fresh and up to date. There's some nuance to get into there about newer vehicles helping with driver retention, but I can also tell you with all confidence that drivers are a lot less expensive than trucks too. So, pick your poison.
Yeah. A lot of it's gonna, like Danny said, there's nuance. It's gonna come down to what your territory looks like, how rural it is, how much damage and wear and tear your trucks are taking on those routes every day. But yeah, it's one of those things where we can give the general answer like Danny said, but really and realistically, to know how long your fleet's going to last, we would want to see what's there now and what the territory looks like, and then we can help you think through your CapEx and planning all of that in the future. And we do that all the time. But it's one of those things where we can give general advice, but really what you need to be successful is the specific scenarios tied to your territory. So here's a question from Daryl. I know there's different ways to pay drivers in P&D. Are there different ways in Linehaul as well? There's different ways I've seen people pay. There's only one right way, in my opinion, and in what I've seen contractors be successful, which is to pay per mile, an amount and a rate per mile. That is what the vast majority of contractors pay. The nice thing is that FedEx also pays per mile. So with that and your payroll at a per mile basis, you can get a really good and clean sense of your P&L and of your profit margins by tracking everything at a per mile rate. Now, there are some I've seen who pay hourly for their drivers, and that I've never seen that go well. It can be really painful if a driver has to sit and wait for their next load for any amount of time. You're paying them for nothing, and it often leads to them getting paid far more than they should. Now, that's for normal runs. There are spot runs, which are essentially really low mileage runs that are basically pickups, but in such large amount of volume that a line haul driver has to do it instead of a P&D driver. And those are paid at a different rate from FedEx. It's a much higher rate. So what I see sometimes on spots is instead of paying per mile, they just set an amount that they pay to their driver for the specific spot run. So you may have different ways of doing it, but for the majority of your line haul drivers, you will want to pay at a per mile rate. Those rates are going to vary a little bit, state to state, region to region, and if it's a solo or a team driver, but that is how most people pay their drivers on the line haul side. Now, this one I think is tied to the volume question around UPS and Yellow, asking if large shippers have to sign a 3-year contract. They definitely do have to sign extended contracts with UPS. I'm not 100% sure what kind of contracts FedEx is pushing on shippers right now. I would imagine that it's more than 6 months. It probably is something like 3 years or longer, but I don't know for sure what kind of contract structure FedEx is pushing onto their shippers right now. Now, can ELD records be an acceptable proof of tracking hours for vehicles over 10,000 pounds? The line haul side, yes. On P&D, most people don't have any kind of ELD. What I would say the standard is some kind of software like Ground Cloud or something else that has hourly tracking where people are clocking in and clocking out in the software. What I'll say is not sufficient is purely depending on the scanners for clocking it or for tracking hours. So, the scanners, when you log into the app, that's basically tracking your on-road hours and it comes out on the daily service worksheets. That's not sufficient for an audit. That's not accounting for any of the hours that happen before they start running their route. So really, letter of the law for the audit is that you need to be tracking hours from the moment they pass through the guard shack at the terminal to the moment they pass back and go to their car. So you need to be tracking hours for that, all of that time. And what I will say on line haul, ELD works, but you also need to, there's not as much of that preload hours that people are doing, but there are safety meetings and things like that that will happen on the line haul side. And you need to record those as well. I see people trip up and run into that on line haul as they're just using their ELD and just the hours the driver is on the road and forgetting about some of that in-terminal and, safety meeting type hour tracking. Again, most line haul tractors are not just above 10,000, they're over 25,000, and they're basically exempt from any kind of overtime law. So it would purely be to show that you're tracking hours, not to be paying overtime. All right. Now you can, if you want to answer this one, Danny, and give some context there. So, I see Tom says he sees some deals that close at 60 to 70% of revenue. So why would he ever see a deal on our website at 90% of revenue?
Yeah, no, that's a really great question, Tom. And I think that it's important to point out that the pricing standards and the metrics that we use when we're pricing out a business to bring to market is not solely going to be based off of top line revenue, because keep in mind, we're very conservative with the percentage or with the top line revenue that we project out. We won't include any peak season revenue for that. And like I said in my content section earlier, that can add up to about 30% of the year's total revenue. So excluding that from our valuation certainly makes things look a little bit more conservative. But let's try this and give you some food for thought here. If we're basing the pricing metrics for our businesses based off of a multiple of EBITDA, then as far as a percentage of revenue is concerned, the better that business is currently being run, the higher a percentage of revenue that multiple is going to equal. What is very consistent across our listing platform is somewhere between a 3.8 to a 4.4 multiple being very standard in what we do. So if we have a business that's running $2 million in revenue and $200,000 in net operating income or EBITDA, compare that to the same business doing $2 million in revenue, but $500,000 worth of net operating or EBITDA. Multiplying 200,000 and 500,000 by 4 is going to give you a very different final number and a very different percentage of revenue. So the percentage of revenue that you see on our listings is more relative of the health of the business as a whole as it's currently being run, not so much a representation of that's value to the market. So if you're looking to take on a more healthy business, then buying one at a 4.2 multiple that's 90% of revenue is going to be much better for you than one that's at a 4.2 multiple and 70% of revenue. Has nothing to do with our methodology and the way that we're valuing businesses, and everything to do with the health of that operation as it sits right now.
Yeah. And the other thing the other part of that is that generally we will see higher margins on the line haul side, just in general. So that's often why the line haul businesses are priced at a higher percentage of revenue, just because their margins are generally higher. So that's why we'll often see those on the higher end. So again, we don't price as a percentage of revenue. It's a multiple of net operating income. But yeah, just like Danny said, the good businesses, the better, higher margin businesses are going to trend up into that range. So not everybody's going to be all the way up to 90%, but we do see them. And that's why you'll see some of those on our site. So here's a question from Rick. So if a route owner who's selling their business, say that they drive on 10 to 15% of the stops, or maybe the driver takes or the owner takes a route, we'll say that it's easier to think through. How do you adjust the pro forma to reflect what the business would look like on a go forward basis? So a couple of things. Yeah, do you want to jump on that one?
Sure, because I was literally just going through this with the contractor earlier today. So it's a really great question, Rick, and I think that it's really important to set aside a couple of things here. If the owner is running 10 to 15% of those stops, chances are that owner is still taking home more pay than they would be paying a driver to run those, because they own the business. It's theirs. They can pay themselves whatever they want, right? So when we go through our method and we look at everything, a big part of how we establish the payroll costs for a business and our projections is we look deeply at the weekly service worksheets and we see how many days a week on average each specific driver is running. So Rick, obviously you're not going to transition with the sale of your business after you sell that. You're not trying to be a driver for someone you just sold your business to. So the way that we would account for that in our pro forma is we would count the number of resources or on-road days that you were making up throughout that business. And we would take the average payroll cost of your standard driver, and we would essentially add another driver into the mix at that pay rate to make up the difference in those resources. Now, if you've got some extra drivers on your payroll and they have the ability to come in and just work more days, we don't necessarily need to add, a driver TBD to that prospectus or that pro forma. As long as we have, proof from your weekly service worksheets that you need 55 resources a week, and we have at least 55 made up through your driver portfolio and whoever's on your driver roster, then we're good to go. But traditionally, owner's compensation is one of the three things that we account for in add backs to our projections. So you're kind of going to get hit with a double whammy there, where we would be adding back your income or your pay to yourself as it is. but we need to make sure that those on-road resources are still accounted for, because what we'll never do is send out a prospectus that doesn't show a fully encompassing fleet or staff coming with the business, because we got to be able to project those two things out. We're managing trucks and people, so we got to have a full accounting of what that CSA needs to service itself.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So you're gonna get a full picture of the expenses. You'll either see, hey, there are already more than enough drivers, so you can sub somebody in to replace the owner. Or if they're missing a driver, we'll call out, hey, we're adding the expense. You're going to see what the net operating income will look like once you have the driver, but you just need to know that that driver doesn't exist. So you'll have to hire them or make sure they're there by the time you stand up. So we'll call it out the way it looks regardless, and make sure that the number you're saying reflects the true expenses to run the business, no matter what that is. All right. And that is all we have time for today. So, it's always great, Danny, to have you come out here and get your perspective on all of this. And we wanted to make sure everybody was aware of the blackout dates and kind of the timelines that you can expect over these next few months when it comes to closing on businesses, P&D and Linehaul. So I appreciate everyone coming out, and I can't wait to see you all next week. And Danny, again, thank you for joining us today.
My pleasure, guys. I think I'm back live with you in a couple of weeks. If you need anything between now and then, hit me up. I'm always available to you. God bless.
Thanks, everybody.